Hey everyone, it's Ben from Board to Bits, and this is part 2 of our series on making a procedural mesh in Unity. So today we're going to create our first very simple 3D object, which is just going to be a triangle. Triangles are the most basic shape in 3D graphics, and pretty much everything in traditional 3D graphics processing is based on triangle elements. The reason for this is that with a triangle, no matter where you put the 3 vertices of a triangle, it's always going to be a flat surface, and that means that the computer can render it very easily. So now that we know the information that our mesh is going to need to create these triangles, we can go into our class and start creating our first mesh. So here in MonoDevelop, we know that we're going to want access to that mesh variable of the mesh filter. A couple things we can do for that. First, we're going to add a header up here, or an attribute, I should say. And this is going to be require component. It's going to be the type of mesh filter. This way we know that whenever we add this script to an object, it will always have a mesh filter on it. In addition, we're going to create a mesh variable down here. We're just going to call it mesh. You can keep it private. And now we're also going to create an awake function. And inside of this awake function, we're going to set mesh equal to getComponent mesh filter .mesh. So now whenever we start our game, this procedural mesh class is going to have access to that mesh in the object. Inside of our start function, we're going to call another method that we're going to make. We're going to call this makeMeshData. We can get rid of update. We don't need it. But I am going to create this void makeMeshData method, and it is going to do two things. It is going to create an array of vertices, and it's going to create an array of integers. Now, we could just create those right in here and then pass them into the mesh, but we might want these to persist as we're going in our game. So I'm actually going to create the variables, make them kind of global to this class. So I'm going to have a vector3 array called vertices and an integer array called triangles. And now down here in our makeMeshData method, we can actually populate these. So I'm going to say vertices is equal to a new vector3 array. And then I can add a couple of brackets here. And inside of here is where we'll put the data for our array. Now I'm just going to start with 3 points to make a simple triangle. And if we jump back over to Unity, we can kind of see the grid here that is the y0 plane. And we see that in this direction, based on the gizmo up here, this is the z-axis, and this is the x-axis over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at a point that is basically 0, 0, 0. I'm not sure if this is exactly it. Actually, I can click on this mesh object, and if I reset the transform, okay, yeah, that is it. This is 0, 0, 0 right here. Then we're going to go along the z-axis over to, so that z is 1. So it'll be, the vector3 would be 0 on the x, 0 on the y, and then 1 on the z. So 0, 0, 1. Then we're going to go over to where it's 1 on the x-axis, but not the z or the y. So 1, 0, 0, and that's going to be our triangle. It's also important to know that we're doing it in this direction, which is clockwise, and that'll be important, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So for these vector3s, we're going to have our first index is going to be new vector3, 0, 0, 0. Second one is going to be new vector3, 0, 0, 1. And then finally, a new vector3, 1, 0, 0. In addition to this, we need to create our array of integers that's going to tell Unity what order it should look at these in, because we could look at them in any given order we want, but we want to make sure we're looking at 0 first, then 1, then 2. So I'm just going to do exactly that. I'm going to say triangles equals a new integer array, start at 0, 1, and 2. And that's the information we need. Now we need to put that into our mesh data, into our mesh class, I should say. So I'm going to create a second method called update mesh. And we'll create that method down here, void update mesh. And we're going to do a few things in here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to tell the mesh to clear itself. Obviously at the very start there's nothing in there. We don't technically have to do this, but if we ever called this again, we are going to just clear out whatever's already there and put in this new data. Actually, you know what would probably make sense? I'm going to right click and refactor this. Instead of calling it update, I'm going to call it create mesh, because we're kind of creating it from scratch right now. Update mesh would be better if we are actually maybe updating a few vertices in it. For right now, we're just creating a whole new mesh. So we're going to clear the mesh. If there's anything in there, get rid of it. And then we can say mesh.vertices equals vertices. So the mesh's vertices is now equal to our vertices array here. And likewise, mesh.triangles will be equal to our triangles array. And that should be all we need, actually. If we jump back over to Unity now and we hit play, we should see that a triangle appears. Now, I'm not sure if this is gonna appear this big, or it might actually just appear right here. We'll see in 1 second. Yep, that big. So this is a triangle starting here. It goes over to from 0, 0, 0 to 0, 0, 1, then over to 1, 0, 0, and back. Now, the reason that this clockwise order is important is because if I move this camera down and kind of try to look at this from below, you'll see that the triangle disappears. And that's because if you look again now, we're going starting here at 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0. This is now counterclockwise. And this is something called backface culling. Basically, how 3D graphics tend to work in most cases is that it only shows one side of a triangle like this, because chances are the other side is inside of whatever the model is, and you don't want to see it. So there's no reason to spend extra processing power rendering this when we can just render the one side. And how a computer decides which side to render is it looks for, and particularly in Unity's case, it looks for the clockwise order. So in this case, this is our clockwise, so it's facing up. You'll also notice that this is a bright pink. This is because we don't have, if we go to our materials in our object, we never set any materials in here. And because of that, this will never, this doesn't know how to render anything. It just knows that something should be there. So it just puts in this bright pink color. I think it comes from actually print production, where they used to put, if there was something that's just kind of for placement or not finished yet, they would tend to put a bright pink magenta color, because it's not often used and it tends to stand out well regardless of where it is. If we were to go over here to this little opener and look at our options, if I add, say, this default diffuse, that now becomes a default diffuse material on here. So that's basically it. That is the basics of how you create an object. Obviously, if you want to create a more complex object, it's going to take more and more triangles to do so, and that's going to require more and more vertices. So in our next video, we're going to look at some of the ways that vertices can interact with one another by adding actually just one more vertice, but creating two triangles and creating our first quad and seeing how those relate to one another. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.